Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to talk about what land trusts are and the work that Alachua Conservation Trust does. The mission of Alachua Conservation Trust is to protect the natural, historic, scenic, and recreational resources in North Central Florida. And while we do work primarily in 16 counties in North Central Florida, we actually work all over the state, from the Florida Panhandle down to the Florida Keys. So one of the things that we realize when we're trying to protect land is that the language that we use doesn't always resonate with our audience, and they may not always realize what we're talking about. So a big one right off the bat is, what is a land trust? What does a land trust do? And so Alachua Conservation Trust is a nonprofit, and as a land trust, we protect land, but we do it with specific intention and criteria related to protecting land for conservation. The way that Alachua Conservation Trust implements our mission is through conservation, restoration and management, and education. The way that we protect land for conservation is by purchasing land, accepting donations of land, and also working with private property owners to protect their property with something called a conservation easement. When an individual or a family protects their land with a conservation easement, we're essentially setting intention for how the property will be protected and managed forever into the future. A lot of times that means we are keeping it as it is. We're recording a baseline of what that intention was for protection. And then in this contract where we're describing what the conservation intention is, we're talking about the natural resources and why the property is being protected. It might be for wildlife, it might be to protect water, to protect working lands, but at the very basic, it is protecting it from future development and intensification. In terms of restoration and management, Alachua Conservation Trust owns over 5,000 acres of conservation land. This is public preserves that you can visit. And on those properties, our land management stewardship team does prescribe burning, they treat exotics, and essentially enhancing habitat to make it better for wildlife and public enjoyment. In addition to our own public preserves, we actually do a lot of partnership programs with other agencies and private landowners and other nonprofits, such as the Prescribed Burn Association, to help good stewardship techniques on private property that also benefits wildlife and other public adjacent lands. In terms of the educational work that Alachua Conservation Trust does, we have a lot of public programs where we're really encouraging community members to get outside with us. We'd love for you to join us in the woods to do bird and plant walks, or on a river to do a paddle. We do a lot of in-person cleanups at some of our preserves or at some of our partners' projects. We also have a lot of county and local school programs where children can come out into the field and participate in learning about the resource. We also have a very active internship program where we work with both stewardship interns to do land management activities, as well as acquisition, outreach, and communication internships where we work in the office to help implement some of Alachua Conservation Trust programs and goals. Without your support, we would not have been successful at protecting over 54,000 acres in our time doing this work. We are really excited to have you join us in some of our new public preserves along the Santa Fe River.
Hi, I'm Tom Kay. I'm the Executive Director of Alachua Conservation Trust. Today I want to talk to you about some of ACT's successes last year as an organization. We had the most acquisitions that we've done in any given year last year in 2021. It was pretty amazing, and I want to touch on some of those today. In 2021, we accepted 4 conservation easements. The first one that we did was the Lundgren easement up in northern Alachua County and southern Bradford County. This easement covered over 276 acres, and it's also in partnership with Alachua County. So the owners, Dr. and Mrs. Lundgren, donated about 236 acres outright to Alachua County after donating it to ACT and Conservation for as a backup. So that not only will it be a unique kind of place where people will be able to eventually enjoy a beautiful site along the upper Santa Fe River, but we'll also have the ability to protect it with a conservation easement so that there's sort of almost a double protection on the property. The second conservation easement we did was with Gina Early in southern Alachua County in Micanopy. It's sort of between the Telford Preserve and Orange Lake, and this is a really important area, not only hydrologically, but also for wildlife that moves through that area, particularly larger species such as bobcat, foxes, otters, alligators, all kind of move through this area. And so this is a beautiful piece of property sort of over in the Micanopy-Evanston area, and we're really happy to receive a donated conservation easement. The third property we did was in also along the Santa Fe River. It was up on the lower Santa Fe River, and it was a deal that we worked out with the city of High Springs. They purchased, with help from ACT, the Santa Fe Canoe Outpost. We're really grateful to the owners of that property for providing us that opportunity to make that happen. There was folks trying to buy the property for development purposes, and the owners really wanted to make sure that it would be developed. And so they worked with the city of High Springs and ACT to make that happen. As part of the acquisition deal, ACT received a conservation easement on that property as well. While it's only 2 acres, it is really significant because it provides public access in the city of High Springs to its residents and visitors, and it really is the gateway to the springs in north central Florida. And finally, the fourth conservation easement we did was right at the end of the year. One of our easement holders, the OS, provided a conservation easement on 152 acres that was adjacent to a larger easement that they did a few years ago. And so this property is actually owned by Sarah Oath and her cousin. And so the two of them provided a conservation easement to ACT to protect that property and ensure that long-term that it stays the way it is. And it's land that's been in their family for generations, used for timber production and agricultural purposes, and it'll continue to be used that way going into the future. So the first acquisition in 2021 was a purchase of a 1-acre property out of Dog Island in Franklin County in the Panhandle. We bought this property to help protect nesting sea turtle habitat, as well as provide additional buffer from climate change and future hurricanes. This property was bought with funding that we got from a variety of different funding sources, including the Archie Carr Center for Sea Turtle Research. And we were going to add this to an existing preserve we have out there that's already has 30 acres. And we're currently working on adding additional 40 acres. I'm working with some of the residents out there at Dog Island to continue to expand the conservation efforts out on that island, which has over 80% of the land now conserved. Our second acquisition that we did this year was at Fox Pen. We added 28 acres, and this was done with a private donation from a donor who saw the property listed for sale and gave us a heads up on it. And we went out and were able to make that deal happen and expand Fox Pen Preserve, which is an acquisition that we did with Alachua County in 2019. And then early in this year of 2022, the county actually went out and bought nearly 4,000 acres, which was the largest acquisition ever done by Alachua County through their Alachua County Forever program. And ACT staffer Byron Flagg was the one who helped negotiate and facilitate that deal. In August of 2021, Willa Drummond, one of our longtime supporters, past Conservation Steward Award recipient, helped expand Serenola Forest Preserve for us. She donated 13 acres of her property. She was selling her home, and so she cut it in half and provided 13 acres that will expand Serenola Forest. So Serenola Forest now will go to about 124 acres. She's also left some of her property through a life estate to ACT, so another additional 21 acres will also be donated to ACT upon her passing and become part of Seminole Forest as well. And we're really grateful for this because this expansion of the preserve is allowing us getting closer to creating a corridor between Paynes Prairie Preserve State Park and Seminole Forest, which is the uplands where wildlife often retreats when water levels are high. In 2021, we also expanded Santa Fe River Preserve. It's now over 1,000 acres. The first half dozen acquisitions that we did for that project were all in Alachua County, and with this acquisition we added 133 acres along the Santa Fe River in Bradford County. This acquisition is really important because not only are we trying to expand and protect lands along the upper Santa Fe River, we're also trying to protect the shores along the New River. 2021 was ACT's busiest year in land acquisition work. This was driven in large part by the really red-hot real estate market. Many landowners try to take advantage of that. We're putting up for sale signs. Traditionally, we try to work with landowners behind the scenes, get the property under contract. In this scenario, and this year, oftentimes we were getting calls from either concerned citizens or partners in the state agencies or water management districts to let us know about projects coming onto the market with signs on their properties. The first one like this was actually a little awesome. So we got a notice from some of our partners that there was signs on a property and the property's gonna be auctioned online of all things. And so we went out and quickly did an assessment of the property, tried to figure out what the value of the property was, and went and bid on that property online in early April to try to acquire this property. And we ultimately were successful in bidding on the property. It was nearly $2 million. And thanks to a bridge loan from the Conservation Fund, a national organization, as well as some private lenders, we were able to secure that property and beat out some developers from Jacksonville who were also competing against us to try to acquire that property. That property is 195 acres on the lower Santa Fe River, and it's near Ginny Springs and another one of our acquisitions that I'll talk about a little bit later, which is Sawdust. In late 2020, one of our partners in the state parks reached out to us and let us know that a critical parcel within Riverside Preserve State Park was for sale. A sign had gone up and they noticed it and contacted us. The state had been trying to work with this group of landowners for more than 2.5 decades, and we're really successful and wanted to see if we could have an opportunity to try to make the acquisition happen. They also realized that with the for sale sign up, that the likelihood of the state being able to move quickly enough to make the acquisition was probably not realistic. And so ACT got to work in early 2021 to help make that acquisition happen. So by the summer of 2021, we were able to get that property under contract. And before the end of the year, we were able to acquire that piece of property, which is 160 acres of uplands. That's really important for both the recharge of the river there, but also for the long-term health of the forest there. It's been really well managed by the state. And so by acquiring this property, it'll sort of ensure that there's not issues with invasive plant species, or that there's going to be homes or an RV park in the middle of the state park. And so we're really fortunate to have that acquisition happen, and we are tentatively scheduled to sell that property to the state of Florida at the end of March of 2022. Another unique property that came across ACT's path in 2021 was Telford Spring. The property had been owned by the same family since 1958. And it also had a for sale sign go up on it. And we were contacted by the Water Management District to see if this was a project that we could potentially make a move on. It's completely surrounded by conservation land. The Peacock Springs Conservation Area completely surrounds this 94 acres up on the Suwannee River in Suwannee County. And so we did just that. We went out and checked out the property, did our due diligence, and then put the property under contract. Telford Spring is a second magnitude spring. It has a 75-foot run out to the river, and it's one of the most beautiful springs you'll see on the Suwannee River. The long-term plan for the property is to sell it back to the Suwannee River Water Management District upon them receiving funds from the state of Florida through the Springs funding source. And it'll be managed for passive recreational use, both for swimming as well as boating and other activities out there. And it's a beautiful piece of property, and we hope that you'll be able to enjoy it here in the coming years. Another unique acquisition that ACT did in 2021 was Sawdust Springs. This property came to our attention back in 2014, not long after actually I started the ACT. At the time when we were looking at the acquisition, the property was about 541 acres and well out of our price range as far as something that we could do with acquiring. So it got changed hands at that point in time, shortly after we went out to do a site visit on the property. But we waited our time, and in late 2020 we reached out to landowners to see if they'd be interested in selling part of the property. Part of the property was under a lease for potential conversion to a solar array, but the wetlands and the lower lands, the bottom lands along the river were available for sale. And so we started that process in early 2021, and we're able to get that property also under contract by the middle of the summer. And late at the end of the year, we were able to acquire that property. Sawdust Springs is about a 139-acre acquisition, predominantly bottomland hardwood forest. At one time was slated to become a bottling plant. Unfortunately, that also was not successful. We're grateful for that. And by acquiring Sawdust Springs, which is just upriver from Little Awesome Preserve, we were able to acquire multiple springs there along the Santa Fe River and protect more than 2 miles of frontage on the lower Santa Fe River. Sticking with the theme for our land acquisitions in 2021, we were contacted by our partners at the state park about a for sale sign that went up on nearly 1,200 acres next to Manatee Springs State Park. Manatee Springs State Park is the first magnitude spring, and the property in question actually has the bulk of the cave system for the spring underneath it. So it's made it a very critical acquisition. Unfortunately, by the time we were able to start moving on the property, nearly 800 acres had been put under contract with a developer, but the remaining 280 acres was still available. Unfortunately for us, that was some of the most critical property, as it having the cave system underneath it. And so we were able to move quickly on that property and get it under contract, and then use a variety of financing to make that happen. So the owner was willing to finance half the acquisition, and then we went out and worked with our wonderful supporters to get funding from them to provide bridge loans to make that acquisition happen. So by the end of the year, we were able to close on that property, and we'll be working on getting that property acquired by the state so that it can then become owned and managed as part of Manatee Springs State Park. In 2021, the acquisitions that ACT was involved in totaled more than $8.5 million. This is a substantial amount of money, far more than we've ever had to do in a single year. And that's possible because of folks like you who help support our organization. There's a number of ways that people help us, not only through annual donations or monthly giving or through a work program, but a lot of other tools are out there and available that really made this work possible. One of the ones that's really made a big difference last year for us was the Conservation 365 program. That's our monthly giving program. The reason that program is so important is it provides us with a stable, continuous source of funding that allows us to do a lot of the work that's not possible without having the funds on hand. So doing the initial work for acquisitions like an environmental site assessment or boundary survey or an appraisal of the property, which are all key components to getting an acquisition done, require that upfront funding. And by having funding that's there every month, we're able to make those acquisitions happen. Many of ACT's acquisitions in 2021 were made possible through bridge loans that were provided by our donors and supporters of ACT. This is something we do oftentimes when we've got short deadlines and turnarounds for pieces of property that we're trying to acquire, or doing deals on behalf of another agency like a Division of State Lands or a water management district. And so we'll oftentimes send out an email or give you a phone call or send you a letter that says we're trying to protect something under a short period of time, and then folks provide us with funding for a period of time, say 6 to 12 months at a low interest rate, and we're able to acquire these properties and then repay those loans back when we receive funding from the state of Florida or one of our other partners or a granting source like a private foundation. One of the other tools that's been a huge help for us as an organization over the last couple of years in getting our acquisitions done has been planned gifts. Individuals leaving things like securities, stocks, second homes, even their main residence to ACT to then be sold to provide funding for acquisitions has been instrumental in getting the work that we've gotten done over the last few years. So if this is something you want to think about, certainly reach out to myself or some of our other staff to talk about ways that you can have a major impact on conservation within our region through your will or trust. Thank you for tuning in today. We appreciate you watching this series, and I hope you'll join us next month for our series on prescribed fire with Barry Coulette and some of the other ACT staff.